Good afternoon there, I think already. It's great to be here today, and I will also talk to you about CITES and what that means for sharks and rays. I'm going to quickly start with giving information on some of the new science on sharks and rays that has been published in the past 2 years, the rationale for the new proposals that are being submitted, and what are some of the implementation tools that we use to be able to make sure that CITES is effective. And so just to recap here, when I talk about sharks, I'm going to be talking about sharks and rays. That's about 1,250 species that occur around the world. They come in multiple sizes and have very different behaviors and have different needs for conservation. But overall, there is one thing that is in common for all of them, is that they're threatened by many different things like coastal development, pollution, climate change. But really the biggest problem for sharks and rays is that they are collateral damage. That means that they're caught in a wide range of gear, whether it's artisanal, industrial, recreational, and generally around the world in fisheries, not just for sharks and rays, we have a problem of overfishing. So we're catching too much fish, and we have a problem of overcapacity. There are too many vessels fishing at the same time. And this is just one site where some of the sites that I work on. So imagine that this is happening in every single country around the world that has a coast, and that this can be happening in multiple sites along the coast. Over time, this has become very unsustainable. And sharks are usually primarily caught because they're used as local consumption, or they're used for the fin trade. And so the primary products that are found in the trade are these fins, and we talk about these fins a lot because they are the things that have captured the attention when it comes to sharks and rays. But there's also the meat that is consumed, and meat is increasingly important in the trade. And for example, this is mako shark, and you can see in the picture that it is caught and it is consumed as sashimi, as very high quality meat. And in the past, when they used to catch sharks, you can see here that the fins are removed from the shark. The sharks used to get caught, the fins removed, and the sharks thrown back into the water. This is a practice called finning. And this was because there was a lot of space on the vessels, on the tuna vessels and so on, to keep the fish, and there wasn't enough space to keep the sharks. The most valuable part of the shark was the fin, so they would remove the fin and throw the sharks out. Now, with the declining fish, declining tunas and so on, when a boat goes out, there's a lot of space that's left on it. And so what's happened is that we've seen an explosion in the trade of meat. And this is just a map to show you some of the meat products and how they're being traded around the world. And in the past 10 years, there's been an increase of 150% in the trade of meat. And you can see here clearly that it goes from many countries in Asia, it gets sent to South America. Brazil is a huge consumer of shark meat, but also increasingly in Europe. There's very high demand for shark meat. Now, this is not labeled as shark meat when it is sold at the market. It's labeled as something else. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this today, but please remember that when we're talking about CITES, we often talk about the fins, but everything, when a species is listed on CITES, all of the products from that species need to be regulated under CITES. And so it's very difficult for us to be able to recognize what meat belongs to what species. And so this is really important when we think about implementation. And obviously, other than meat, there are also other products that are being traded. There are the gill plates for some species that are called the mantas and the devil rays. These are used as a tonic in Chinese traditional medicine. They're the jaws of many large species that are used as souvenirs. And there's the oil. The liver oil is extracted from the sharks, and it is used as vitamin A. It's used in cosmetics. And when they were developing the COVID vaccines, they were also testing squalene. This is the name of the liver oil. They were testing squalene in terms of how to use it. So all of this, if a species is listed on CITES, all of these products need to be regulated. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk about the new science, and this is really important because we have a lot of new information that we've been able to compile over the last few years. And what we've done is we've looked at the IUCN Red List of threatened species. And this here, the red means critically endangered, the orange means endangered, and the VU means vulnerable. These three categories are the categories that tell us that a species is threatened. Now, when we evaluated 1,199 species of sharks, rays, and chimeras from around the world, we found that 37% of them are threatened with extinction. That means that the new science shows that 1/3 of all species are threatened and are at high risk, and this is all due to overfishing. And when we looked at this a little closer, so you can look at the maps here, the red means that more than 3/4 of species are threatened, and the yellow means that only half are threatened. And you can see in Asia, there is a large problem with a lot of these coastal species that have either disappeared or our population levels are very, very low. Now, we also found that 3 species are close to extinction. Now, we think they're actually possibly extinct. We're saying close to extinction because if you imagine the world, you look at the globe, most of the Earth is actually water. It is impossible to go look in every part of the world and all the water column to determine if a species exists there. So it's very difficult to prove marine extinction in the marine world. And so what is interesting here is that most of the data that we have on sharks and rays comes from fisheries. What are fisheries catching? And these 3 species have not been caught in over 60 years. They used to be caught, and now, even though there is increasing fishermen going out and catching at all depths, they haven't been seen or haven't been recorded in over 60 years. So we're seeing potentially extinction of species happening very quickly. And what that means is when we talk about conservation, we talk a lot about pandas, we talk about elephants, about tigers, and so on. And these all fit into this mammal group down here, where 26% of mammals are considered threatened with extinction. But sharks are very much higher on the list. They're right after amphibians, so after the frogs. They're the second most threatened taxon around the world. They receive a lot less attention than corals, than birds, than mammals, but clearly there is a problem and we need to be giving attention to these species. Now, just some examples. This is a map that looks at decline rates for some species that are rays, the wedge fishes and the guitar fishes. They were listed on CITES in 2019 as a family, and this was partly because government information from Iran, Pakistan, India, and Indonesia, the countries where they have the darker color here, that means there's the most species occurring in those waters, the highest diversity. They had population declines, and you can see here the drops of 80%, 99%, 87%. So very, very steep declines in a very short amount of time. That means that for some species, you can only exploit them for a short few years before populations start really declining and disappearing. We did a similar study. This is all fisheries data, stock assessment data, and we looked at what we call the oceanic species, the hammerheads, the threshers, the makos, and we found that in the last 20 years, there's a 71% decline in oceanic species. Many of these species are caught in industrial fisheries. We did a study looking at BRUVs. These are BRUV. It is a camera, a video camera that you put underwater and you put bait on it. So you crush dead fish and you assume that sharks and rays will be attracted to this for food. And they put these cameras in all these areas here that you see with squares or circles on the maps. And so very big global study. And they found that in areas where in the past there were major aggregations of sharks, there were no sharks, not one shark on 20% of global coral reefs. So that means that many sharks are completely disappearing in many parts of the world. And lastly, you ask yourself, well, where are these sharks? This study looked at species in the trade. So this is a study from Hong Kong that showed that from the fins that are in Hong Kong, 79% of the fins belong to species that are considered threatened. So again, here you see in red, in yellow, and in orange, these are all species that are critically endangered, or vulnerable. So clearly there's a big problem with what's happening in the wild, and all of this is mostly driven by the fin trade. So what about conservation? I unfortunately don't have time to go through all types of conservation measures, but generally, regionally, internationally, these are the species that have some form of protection on international agreements. So that's about 50 species of sharks and rays that receive any type of protection. That's less than 5% of the 1,200 species plus that I talked about. When we think about CITES specifically, 44 of these species are listed on CITES. Now, what is CITES? Again, I think Kiri mentioned some of this. I'm just going to explain it very quickly. Appendix 1 is species that are threatened with extinction, which may or may not be affected by trade. And all of these species are prohibited in commercial trade. We have 5 species of sawfishes that are included here. They are extinct from most parts of the world. Appendix 2, and this is really important, these are species that are not necessarily threatened with extinction, but may become so unless trade is regulated. So species that are not threatened, but we should be careful because maybe something will happen to them. Trade is allowed, but you need a permit. And these are the remaining 40 south species that are included on Appendix 2. I won't talk about Appendix 3 because this is really a national decision in terms of what a country might want in terms of permitting. But if we focus on Appendix 2, what we need to do is, with Appendix 1, what we need to do is we need monitoring and enforcement. What we need with Appendix 2 are these permits and these certificates, as well as monitoring and enforcement. And to give these permits, we really need to ask simple questions. Is the trade detrimental for the species survival? Was the specimen acquired legally? And are the conditions of transport and housing adequate? We don't need to worry about number 3 because we're not dealing with live animals. So we only need to think about these 2 questions. Is it legal? Is the trade sustainable? And was this legally acquired? And so how do you implement this? And this is really important because it's a question that has come up a lot with all of these new proposals. You need 2 types of tools. You need identification tools, and you need what we call non-detriment findings. And I will explain both of them very quickly. With identification, the government of Indonesia came to us 2 years ago and said, we need help. After all of the previous CITES listings, they are the largest shark fishery in the world, and they wanted help to identify different types of products. So they asked us to develop 3 guides. The first guide is the full carcass ID. So this is what you do when you have a full animal in front of you. How do you identify it? Then they said, we also need information on how to identify a processed carcass. This is when you remove the head, you remove the fins, and all you have is this trunk of meat. And then they asked us, well, what do we do when we have dried products, when we have only the fins left? So we worked with the customs officials in Indonesia, and we developed these 3 guides. Now, I'm going to give you an example of one guide because we talk a lot about fins, keeping in mind that the primary traded fins are always going to be the first dorsal fin and the 2 pectoral fins, along with the lower caudal fin. And we basically, all of the information we used was based on what traders use in Hong Kong and in China. They use visual identification. They sit with a pile of fins and they look for the fins within the piles. And so they're the ones that we used in terms of understanding what is the best method to do this. And this guide, again, focuses on how do you distinguish fins, and very simple. You don't need a master's degree, you don't need a PhD to understand this. You just need to ask the right question. And for every question you ask, you have a yes or no answer, and it guides you through every step of the identification to determine if this is a CITES listed species or not. So we've done this for all of the listed species, for dorsal fins, pectoral fins, and then we've also added information here on sawfishes and gill plates for the other types of species that are also CITES listed and being traded. All of these guides are now available on this website, CITESsharks.org. They're available in English, in French, in Spanish, and if there's a request by any country, they would also translate them into the appropriate languages. So the second thing I would like to talk to you about are these non-detriment findings. So a lot of this information was developed by Blue Resources Trust. If you want additional information, I can send you this email address, but I would recommend contacting them because they can give you very specific details of what the non-detriment finding tools are. So just overall, a non-detriment finding is the scientific committee in the country saying that we agree to export all of these fins, all of these products, because we think it will not be detrimental to the survival of that species. So it's an agreement by the country's scientific authority to say that the trade is okay. Why do you prepare an NDF? Because you have to have for CITES a record that you have looked at this, that you are compliant, and this will avoid anybody coming and saying your trade is illegal. But it's also because NDFs are a fisheries management tool. You can, by having these NDFs, it allows you to determine what is happening in your waters, what do you have in terms of data, and it allows you to have a mechanism where if at one point you see that your data is indicating population declines, you can immediately step back and say, oh, I think I have a problem. Maybe I should manage this fishery. So it allows traceability in terms of products, and it allows also this fisheries management and to be an alarm if something is happening. And so for a very long time, it was complicated, I will admit. They had a document more than 100 pages in 2014, and it was step-by-steps of how to do things and so on. Despite its complication, despite its complications, many countries around the world were able to develop NDFs from North America, South America, Africa, many countries, and many of these are available on the CITES website. I believe also Japan has developed an NDF for sharks. And so, but because of the additional listings, we thought that it would be good to have an easier way of doing this. And the easiest way of doing it is this NDF software that's been developed. It's called the eNDF. And it's a very, very simple process where you can use it electronically. So you go into this website and you enter information, and it automatically develops the NDF for you, automatically creates a report based on the information that you input, and then becomes available to make decisions on what to do for your species. Now, what's really interesting with this too is that you can do it for species that are not listed on CITES yet, to see what is happening with your stocks. And so this is a user-friendly interface. It has control user access, so you can determine who you want to work on certain things. It really helps you to integrate all of the information and the references. Like I said, the output is a publishable document with clear recommendations as to whether the trade is sustainable or not. There will be a side event at the co-op, so at the Conference of Parties in 2 weeks, that will launch this NDF software. And we think that not only can it be used for sharks and rays, but eventually you can also change some of the information within it, and you can use it for all other species that are potentially listed on CITES and that occur in the countries. So very quickly, what does this mean for the proposed species? I think Kiri mentioned this earlier, but there are, 4 proposals for sharks and rays. I won't go into all of them. I want to just mention the requiem shark one very quickly, partly because it's one that has been probably the largest species group, so it's a lot of discussions about it. I do want to mention that the hammerhead proposal was put together to close a loophole in the identification of fins. There are too many fins that look the same as species that are not listed. So having the family listing will close those loopholes. The freshwater stingrays, this is more of live trade, so not really relevant to the fin trade. And the guitarfish family, because a lot of these fins are now entering the trade, and many of these species are already critically endangered. And if you remember what I said earlier, Appendix 2 is supposed to be for species that are not yet threatened. And however, the proposals are all for species that are already threatened. And so this family of requiem shark, 54 species, 46% of all of the fins that are in Hong Kong and China, and 66% are threatened. So imagine if this family was listed, you would be able to have a fisheries management and a permitting system for most of the fins that are entering the trade, which really would mean traceability and better understanding of what's happening. And so a lot of the questions that we have is, well, what happens when we have something like this? How do you identify things? And the benefit, we developed this guide. It's also available online, and I can share it with you. And this is really focused on the new species proposals. And basically what we looked at is, you can see here, these are the dorsal fins for the requiem sharks. And the big circle means that they all fit together. And then there's segregations. But you can see that generally, most species have a very similar dorsal fin. And so implementation would be very difficult if you didn't have the family listing, because then you would really need a lot of training and a lot of work to be able to distinguish between the fins. And we did this with the pectoral fins as well. And you can see here that they group into 4 different groupings But again, it would require a lot of work to be able to differentiate between them. So if you have this family level listing, it really allows traceability, and it allows a permitting system where most of the trade is actually regulated, and it makes it very easy to immediately know what is legal and what is illegal. And so I'll end it with that, and I'm happy to take questions about any of this. Thank you.